So now we're recording. I will comment briefly on the midterm of last year, so you will see what people did. We didn't have the workshop as we do now, so the urban strategy was a little bit slower, but still students did. But you will see how they divided the work, and you may have your doubts solved. Last year, we put more stress on the housing than in the urban design. That was done at the very end of the semester. But students had to take many decisions on that sense. So I will share my screen. And first, well, this is not because you have already. So this is the Hongjedong. Let's see if that goes through. The whole side of Hongjedong. So we have team 1 and team 5 were 3 students each, right? So they have larger sites. Team 4 and team 3 were 2 students each, and team 2 was 1 student. That was the group with most harmony of all of them, but they all had more hard time to do things, and all did very differently. So they all shared the main site. Only thing, team 1, we had a very good student who was not so much integrated, and that made him work a little bit by separate, but very good one actually. Hemin, you may know him, and I think just a moment. I don't know why the I pencil does not work suddenly. 1 second. Maybe it got disconnected. Oh, it is there. Okay. I was showing some. Okay. Now it works. So I think they divided in 3 areas, right? And this was a Hemin. Hemin only was 1 semester with us, and he had some difficulty to coordinate with Yechan and Jechin, who are very good friends, right? And being in the border, Hemin worked like crazy, but he was never following the rhythm, so they had difficulty to coordinate. But this part was quite consistent. Team 5 was the same, so we had, who was it? I lost her name. So again, on one side, we had very nice students, but only working 1 semester and very different ideas. So that's all. And Seri, 2 hard workers, coordinated quite well, but they organized very well. Team 4, we had Maisa and Menli, who are very good friends, but did totally different projects, but very much in the same area, so they kind of coordinated. Sui and Juani, they're very good friends and did very good, very nice combination. So this was maybe the together with Yechan and Jetin, the ones which were more consistent. And of course, Eugene did very nice work, all in very different styles, right? So I will go first with team 5. I will show you what Seri, Dasol, and Jimin, I think it was Jimin, did in midterm. And well, you have the result in the book, so but you don't have what they did but midterm, so that will help you have more context. So I will stop sharing this. I will go to Safari. No, Safari here. Okay. Okay, so we have a midterm submission. And I will have first with the Seri. So Seri was the group leader, as she is. And that is the whole site strategy. This is something they agreed together. They kept all the alleys, but some were cut and they just continued, as some of you suggested. And they decided where to put the parking, because we have this is the main street of Hongje, right, where the subway is a little bit more on that side. And there was a big Tanchi construction going up there. So we knew this was going to be a very busy street. The elementary school is over there, also will be very busy. So they thought the best place for the parking was over there and in the other corner, just near the market. Right? So they will have like a not difficult connection from parking to any kind of plot. Right? And then Sari worked, I think, in this area. Tassel worked in this area, and Jimmy worked in this area. You see, one thing we did not, and I include myself, we didn't do so well in midterm was to show very clearly the before and after. And you may have difficulty knowing what was before this, right? So this was not much more than that you did in the workshop, right? More or less this kind of stage. But always you have to show what was before and what you are doing so we understand better what is going on. I don't want to do this. I want to go to the next. Okay. So this was an image that Sari had for the parking with pilotis, which is just an image. In the end, it was not going through, but you have to visualize a little bit what you're intending. She was working more on the house. And she did something very interesting, but very complicated. She almost died. Well, Sari almost died in Studio 1, Studio 3, Studio 2, Studio 3, and Studio 4, because it was always really complicated. That's the nature of people, right? But she was trying to make a kind of a courtyard house with shared living. So you had like large rooms with some common space and buffer space, which would be the bathrooms, right? With some courtyard and some exterior space. So you have some kind of independence and nice common life. And then studying the different combinations to have this be more flexible, right? So this was like the elaborate prototype she did for the first quarter. This is the study of circulation and the independence and so on. And this is the combination studies. And you see, it was mainly handwork. Then they all did a very nice computer work in the end. You can understand how to work in sections, how to adapt to the topography, how this kind of typology can be combined. The key point was the courtyard, which is something many of you are working also on, right? But this was already with a very exact size modulation, and some combination intentionality. So different ways of combining into how to adapt to topography going up, right? And how to make difference in height and so on. And then a proposal for the site. Again, this was very elaborate, but once you have the module and the ideas, you start thinking how you can implement. You see that even though all the students agreed to keep the alleys and the structure, Sari demolished almost everything, which was not necessary, but it's also a possibility, right? So there was no hint of the parking. I think Chimin did the parking in this side, and that's all did in the other. But some kind of commercial facilities near the school, because they thought this would be more public street and the alleys went there. A lot of common spaces linking the different blocks, right? Which she had to correct later because it was like too much. And then some green in between, which was also too narrow, but still it was a first intention, first view of how to make this. And even though Hongje is not as dense in terms of people living in small rooms as it is Karibondong, the houses, they're traditionally small and very tight together, right? So working with Water City was also one challenge. It was kind of ground floor, which one of the required documents, and the upper floor. And this was the difficulty of keeping those green spaces, but also organizing the cores, stairs, and elevators with the proper distances to each of the units, right? And the proper escape ways to each of them. Because those cores will need one entrance from the street, so they need easy access. And that has to do also on how the alleys are organized. You need to have all necessary, but not too many, so you don't spend all the space in stairs and elevators, but enough cores so you don't have too much distance from the units to the escape place, so for terms of stability. And again, there was an intention to have plenty of common space in every floor. SETI studied the Montreal habitat by Shafty, which had a lot of spaces in between. Then she had to correct because it has nothing to do with habitat, and the habitat was something which was not so successful. So they have plenty of space, but nobody uses because Montreal is too cold for that. But well, that was quite well done. Sections, again, you see the still a bit rigid, but quite interesting combination of green spaces and the units. Interest for the light and this porosity many of you are looking for. And she had to work on softening a little bit the topography, right? That was a bit harsh to do, but well, nice drawing for section, more sections. Again, finding difficult points on how to solve those big steps, right? And big on how to make courtyards with plenty of light. Some of them were not working because many of them were like tunnels rather than courtyards. But again, for me, it was quite done. And then some image for the market, which was like a little bit disconnected. This never came into reality because you have to be careful. It's nice you train with the images, but this is not giving so much direction on how you can implement that in your project. But still, it's nice there's drawings. And then that's the evaluation sheets we don't need to see. Then Dassault had a totally different style. He did on the opposite side. So SETI was working in this area, I think, probably a bit more. Dassault was one of the few who was brave to give a proposal for the main street. So he proposed kind of a market interface with the street, and then living building. It's not a huge project, but complex enough. It's had kind of a commercial with houses on the top, some kind of a marketplace square to give more space for the street. Because Hongjedong, the problem is the market is over there, but there's plenty of people selling on the streets, right? So that's all thought giving a bit more space for that activity was better, and you have kind of a slowing, wider space on the street away from the cars, which will just take you to the hill upwards, right? It's like two projects in one, but quite the intention was clear, not defined, and that's all. It's hard working, but a bit more slow in the process, right? It's very linear. He has very clear idea, but he was not as aggressive as Seri, which is like kind of producing all the time. Dassault had as a reference Tadao Ando, those hill houses you may recognize at some time. Ando was a bit tricky because it's very difficult to be so minimalistic. Anyhow, this is the site plan, then going backwards. This is the idea for the ground floor. So there's a big excavation. So here you see the hill. And then you had, when you have this kind of stepped houses with the hill behind, you have always the problem what to do with the space under the houses, right? Which he had to deal with. So shops, marketplace, and some kind of space in between, which he had to define over the weeks afterwards. This is going up, also defining the course and the steps going to the hill and the access. So it will like going from one stair and accessing the different levels of the star building, and then connecting to different alleys of the existing town. So in that case, that's always a bit more contextual. Going upstairs, right, to upper floors. And this is the section. So you see, this was like too radical. Then he had to soften a little bit and work a bit more on the hill, those connections. But it's like from the main street to the back, and this will continue with the small houses on the back, right? So again, one interest of this project was dealing with the main street, which I think so far only Group 4, Junghua and Junghyun, are doing this time. And this was his study for the houses, for which Tatawando was not so helpful. And also trying to see how he would work with not just the flat sandwiches between floors, but having some kind of space differences between rooms and some elevation study. Oh, smaller units, right? And this was like the basic type he was using. So thinking how it would work in section, actually 2 sections, right? So one section going like this, just this one. Another section going like this, probably. Right? Because maybe it's this one over here. And then some very diagrammatic elevation. In that case, the site strategy was already presented by the group leader. This is what I was telling. This was a group work. So each student then showed only his own project. And then Jimin had a harder time understanding the site, and she was doing something too much disruptive. It was really jaggable, right? And in this time, okay, she was working in smaller blocks with the green in between. That project changed a lot, but you see, it's not easy to see how this connects to the other students' works. I think we have some pages. Actually, this could have been possible, right? It's like having units and having specific points in the corners, giving interesting space between a green area and some common area in the street. Not especially original, but okay, this could have been a nice project. This is the initial planning for the alleys, giving a bit more connections than before. And this was the house study, which was interesting, but still improved a lot. It's kind of a big terrace, right? With a common space and then the rooms on the sides with an entrance on one. It's a little bit elaboration of the usual apartment, but some original way. Well, the elaboration was much better. So Jimin had to do a bit longer process in this sense. Study of elevations, that improved a lot also. It's very much abstract, and her site was not flat. That's why those things. And probably those sketches were the most interesting, in which she was trying to recreate that topography. Also, she abandoned and did something different after midterm. But at least she had already decided the main organization and the number of houses, and the typology was going on. She had a bit difficulty on finding the size and giving some kind of personal proposal for housing, right? That plan was not terrible, but was not especially exciting. So this was one group. Let's see the group, the following, which was Menli and Maisa. In this case, coordination was a bit worse, and they just worried mostly about their houses. So if you remember, it was a long block. So Maisa was working on one side and Menli in the other. And also they have the strategies, they work very much. This drawing I put here, especially for Uri Minje, because Menli is really artistic. She draws very well. Actually, she could be a painter. But as everybody has a difficulty to continue with the process because things are difficult and you have to proceed with it. So when she gets stuck, she starts making like a drawings, but it's like a making sun study, which after it's never used. And this is many hours drawing. And you don't need to do it because you had already the digital model. You can calculate already you can do this in a few minutes in Rhino or in SketchUp, right? But it's like trying to be busy when you're stuck. So it's nice, but then it was not so useful because then it didn't work. And this is just because mainly kept all the main buildings to the street, she then changed it. And there was a church and a new building, which also kept, and she demolished most things in between. This may connect a little bit what Junho and Junhyun are doing, like having, not keeping everything in the border, but having big buildings in the border and making a smaller town on the back of those borders, right? Well, Minje, you laugh, but you understand this. It's getting busy by making nice drawings, but not really proceeding with the project. Okay. So this can also, okay, finding places for where to sleep, where to put the house. Well, this is an interesting study where you will put the openings according to the context. Yes, and then organize a bit more. And then the house type, this also improved a lot. Mainly, she's from Turkmenistan. She was trying to adapt a Turken house peculiarities to Seoul and improved a little bit later, like larger, smaller units with big terraces. There's something you have to be careful. When you make photos of the sketches, at least have the camera straight over the drawing and give good contrast. It's a pity you spend the time doing those drawings and then you present this so badly, right? And this is more interesting. So this tells you about the strategy. So though this is the existing church with the courtyard, existing villa, which she kept, and existing commercial buildings, and then the new constructions, like filling the rest. And you see the smallest scale of the houses, which were like also the living units in that area, right? This was a nice part. And this is what saved more or less her midterm in this case. So from here, kind of the project developed more than with sun and shade studies you saw before. And then some sections, people have more difficulty, never draw trees like that. Again, you take the photos straight, but this was not, well, this is telling you about the scale what you're working and what you're dealing with, right? But still that improved enormously in the following 2 months. With my side, so it was a bit more difficult. I will show all of them. And she didn't even organize things. So Maisa did also her housing units, right, in different ways. Tried to give isolation, which was nice, and worked on the elevations from the side. And then the combinations. The area of Menli and Maisa was much flatter, so they didn't need to work with topography so much. And Maisa was working on having large common space between houses to compensate for the minimum space of the houses. But those houses needed a lot of work afterwards. So don't look very much into the detail. So she studied all combinations of floor plans and so on. Some elevations, and this was part. So again, Maisa kept most of the main buildings. She's just working in a crossing, trying to make 4 houses or 4 towers in that area with some street space. Right? So you don't need to be as ambitious as it was, for example, Seri, which she did totally new town, right? Or mainly even she really did a lot of housing spreading around. probably mainly was a little bit similar to what, well, I spoke of group 4, but probably the marketplace spreading around is in different way, but it's a strategy of elements just moving around the different areas, right? But other things were very much specific, as the Sol was not so expansive, or in this case, Maisa. So, and anything's okay provided the proposal makes sense in terms of housing, also in terms of improving the city. Let's go to the following group, which I think is, I will erase this. Better now. The group of soy and honey. I don't know who presented the site strategies. Probably here, I have to go backwards. Well, when you scan, it would be nice if you put the scans straight, right? It's not difficult, because otherwise we have to see them. So this is the main street. So Maisa mainly were here, and Jimin, Seri, and Dasol were over there. So here they preserved all the alleys, and they said a little bit what they wanted to do, right? Which is pedestrianizing, creating open spaces, and they worked on the front also, and also proposed the renewal of one apartment house, which I don't see clear what is here. Was existing apartment which they included in the whole project. Again, this plan is important, but the issues and strategies should be clearer. In this plan, you know, we have small numbers, small errors. I think it has to be a bit more evident. And you have to show the existing and the new. I think this you did better, but still not totally clear, right? So there's something which we improved. And this is already the on-site, what's the existing open spaces, the circulation study, and then the sections. And you see, in this case, the topography was brutal from the hill to the street. And this was the front of the street, which again, the same as Tassel did, tried to make a connection between the housing. So it's commercial and then housing continuing to the hill. It's kind of overlapping between the very busy street and commercial, right, to the more private housing. But still having some front, even though it's noisy, you have a very nice view to Inwan San and the mountains. So, and this also helped to have quite a few views to most of the houses on the back. Not all the houses, but quite a nice view, right? There was a problem of scale. She had to work, but as always, this is something that comes with a bit more effort and time. This is the plan. Again, the basic units were there, and the question was how to assemble them to have some scale which is consistent with what exists before, right? So the buildings are fragmented and divided in a way that they don't break the proportion. This is the existing apartment which was renewed. It's not as big as the one we have, but still there was a strategy to renew that. And this would connect to the following site, which was Sui, right? I went too fast. So different levels. One difficulty here was to connect to the street. And here also they put the parking, right, from the street, not from the inside. So you don't need to cross with cars all the time, only with the emergencies. And this is the essay for the presentation. And these are the different studies for the housing. In this case, Juani was inspired of Lacaton and Vassal, right? In terms of giving a lot of space with a quite simple interior. So the keyword was a lot of veranda outside, like a double layer towards the street. which was, I think, some of his studies was about it. And that is the different ways of doing that. Because that also went section studies, and also how to deal with the section and different floors of that, again, layout. And this was an alternative, never came. Still in italics. And then a little more detail of the house. Again, a problem to or worry, concern to visualize the interior space, not only having a diagram of the plan with the different combinations and so on. Then we have a SUI. I think we go backwards. Okay, so in this time we could do offline. So we did the presentation on the studio. So again, this is the main street. We have a hospital here. I think it was the hospital and some commercial building. So the problem was connecting to the street. Otherwise, you have to make a long way to come to this side. And then this is the continuation. I think Juani came up till here. So he had a different type of houses. They were trying to keep a similar scale, and they were working with the same alleys continuing, right? And they divided also where's the parking, where's the accesses, and so on. They had to do in combination, strategies and so on. So there's the full site. It's a pity because we don't have so much, but you can see the different types in the visualizations of that proposal. Yeah, and okay, so the sections were a bit more controlled than the ones of Juani. Juani had more hard time, although this approach into the street was also difficult. But the typology Suivas uses was more based on Hanok, which is very tough to make on a multi-floor. But Hanok had very nice scale, so she could take out and in and out bits to have this kind of combination, and then with time that worked well. And you can see even that in that small sketch that well, it just starts getting interesting, right? So I think this is the border between Juani and Sui, different houses. So they also considered each other work, so they will know how one building affects the other and how they create open spaces in between, which benefit all of them. And also we're very aware of the existing buildings, right? So the open spaces were in the proper places without disturbing much, and improving the conditions, not only of the new construction, but also the existing buildings around. I think. I'll have to go back this way. Okay. I think we show everything. So the section that we see on the plan. Okay, so this elaborate better, but we have an idea of what is going there. Then we have the group of one, say Eugene, which didn't upload, so I cannot show. She did very nice, but it was slow, a bit more contextual than others. So you can see in the book. So let's go to the last group. I think Ye Chan did the strategy. Okay, this is a full presentation, right, about what exists, the plan of the market, the idea of making the market integrated into town, the open spaces, right? This is the new Danchi, which is already finished, which affected our area. And the strategy for making the streets pedestrian. So the idea was to keep all the alleys as they were. And some sections, it was more Yechan work, but some of the Jechin was also following this, how to work in section for those streets, right? This was for group. Actually, this was Hemin using the existing Eugene mansion as a main parking for everybody. So, you know, the site they were using was, it was the other site. Or was, no, okay, this is the plan. So we were just in this site. So they proposed to make an underground parking in this whole street, so cars could come in and out without needing to disturb that area. So there was already a big proposal for it. And it was not difficult because this was already excavated. So we have the excavation for the river, right, which is under Eugene Mansion. So probably it's not so difficult to make one floor of underground parking. So that would make all this surface pedestrian, and that would integrate Eugene with existing market and the housing. So you don't have a cut. Right now, this is not a very busy street, so you can cross. But okay, that's, and they didn't go beyond that. So they said this is much more parking than we need. It's possible to make, and we solve the parking problem. We can make everything else pedestrian. Actually, they did one more parking around, which Yejin solved in his project. I think we showed before. And this is the proposal of Yechan. So it's by floors. Again, Eugene Mansion is on there, so he created new buildings. Many of them were kept. The market is on the left. And this is the house in his prototypes of housing, which was already organized. And near the market, he had a marketplace in the lower floors and housing on the top. It's like a multi-layered proposal. And as you get near the school, they become more residential and more porous to have more green and less markets between buildings. So it's the third floor, second floor. Here just integrated Chechen buildings. Market is over there, I think. Again, here they have to talk to each other to know what we're doing, so they knew how the buildings of one student would affect the buildings of the other, right? And they agree on how to put the terraces, the greens, and the openings, and so on. And I think this is the ground floor. And some of the section studies. So it's like this scale down afterwards. So like a large scale towards the Eugene Mansion, which is a big building. Well, there's more space with the market space, public areas, and on the top, more and more public housing with quite interesting interlocking of space. Yechan used a very, very sophisticated housing design. But this was one of the few who tried to integrate a commercial, revitalize the market space. Of course, there's not only market, there's a lot of public, everyday common spaces for the neighborhood use, right? So integrating these kind of public spaces with the housing on top, without needed to make a house and then public programs in other place. So like making this kind of more compact traditional city. actually, Ye Chan was one of the few who was very interested on the 1970s apartments, which had actually 2 floors of commercial and then housing on top of it. Well, Eugene Mansion was one example of that, right? But there were more, and that gave a very different feeling of the space on the street. So he was trying to elaborate on that without copying those typologies, but continuing with that idea. And this is the detail. Already with thinking on the structure and the elevations. I think he had some floor plans, which I don't know why are not here, but okay. One of the few who also gave an image of elevation, right? And how to integrate this kind of commercial space with the houses on the top. And again, keeping the scale of a small town kind of humane, not this kind of huge apartments or endless slabs, which are very mechanical in some sense. And then we go to Jejin. Ye Chan reference, I'm not sure. He was working in the old apartments, and Ye Chan had many references, so I couldn't see who was thinking about. Of course, he went into Herzberger, the Dutch, and Van Eyck, many others, but it was not as clear as other students. And I have to see Jejin, probably the orders from the beginning. Again, Ye Chan gives the main strategies. So here, Jejin is speaking of his specific site, what is in the area. And you see here, speaking already on the existing units. So he would make the houses. In this case, we were careful as we are now. We tried to make at least as many houses as units as they were before, but also keeping at least as many parking places that existed before. And then additional parking we may need for new programs we create. Just a second. So I have a visit. Just a second. I will close the door. Okay. And you see, this is not great, but those scans are nice. They are straight, they are clean, they're not perfect. Jejin could have cleared some of the dirty places, but and the cell and so on, but still, this is something we can look quite nicely. And then this is the idea of the ground floor with the street and the common spaces, the existing buildings. And then his hard time studying the houses with the connections and the interior space. Interior elevations are important, and he was working at 1 to 50 almost from the beginning in order to avoid the abstraction of just putting walls, but really getting the feeling of how those spaces work and feel in reality. So planning at 1 to 200 and 500 is perfectly compatible with studying small areas or the unit spaces at 1 to 50 and 1 to 20, even making models of those units who are working. So it's not the abstraction and telling we have just one room there. Okay, larger, smaller units and how they are together. As everybody having a hard time finding how to put elevator, stairs, and the common space and the access, right? And the green and so on. And also how this will have to do with the other buildings we have in front or facing you. On upper floors, again, look the study of those common spaces, right? With one core, and then we have 2 cores for safety. And providing, as we say, some common space, not only the house, but some kind of common spaces around inner courtyards, a bit more private than the green you give to the street. So if you look carefully, there's a lot of thinking and a lot of care in those proposals. And then, well, Eugene studied all the floors. Some people did just some basic floors and the sections, which again were quite hard. But the way of solving hard things is working them from the beginning, little by little, and then you can improve. Interesting, given the context, we have a large building. Probably he could have given a bit more of the street, the position of the elevators, stairs, and so on. This is why you need to study these assemblies and the proper site where you are, right? And see what you can do. One. Justin had two areas he worked. So he had actually two projects of the same kind of typology, but two different assemblies, which was interesting. So he tested his project, his idea, into different places. The floor plans and then the elevations, which he tried to follow the traditional look of the houses there, but then it was difficult to be consistent with the other elevations. And then little by little, as we commented at the beginning, he actually, judging, we said, we saw much in detail what he did along the semester to prove that. But again, you need to start here. So you see the problems and you start taking decisions on which direction you will go. Judging could have been more contextual or been a bit more, I don't know, modernistic or more designed, right? And he chose a different way. He was a little bit in between, right? But here you have like different possibilities. And the moment to study them is now, of course. And then the whole site, this was so with Yechan, sorry. So you see how the two projects work together and see how we had difficulty to have him in. Again, he worked like crazy and he's very talented and very hardworking, but kind of had difficulty coordinating. Hemming was more of the like a Chegebal. We tried to make him a little bit more down to earth, just putting a new thing inside an area, and everything is possible. It's too easy because you avoid many circumstances, right? So it was Jejin, and then I think the last we have to see is Hemin. Hemin, nah. A very well organized PowerPoint, the whole site. So he gave his own vision of the general study. He included the slides of the group work he personally elaborated. Right. So he just to put temperature studies, seasonal temperature, the water areas, again, the program, and this is the specific area. So you see, we had about 5,000 square meters per student, which is more or less what we have now, and it worked quite well. Doesn't mean we need to be larger or smaller, can do more or less, but it's an area which allows you to do something complex enough to have a challenge. Then the accessibility by walking subway, the road movement, car movement, and then the images of the site. And this is already specific of his own site, that's what he had around. So the school on one side, Eugene mentioned on the other, and then smaller buildings on the other sides. So this was quite a difficult site to work with the context. And this is already his own strategies for this site, right? How to implement this. So this is not any more group work, this is already individual work of him in. And they start having visualizations of his ideas of specific areas. Some diagrams. I will erase my scribble. There's some visualizations of what the intentions. So this is the parking between Eugene Mansion and our site. Actually, it was him who studied the parking himself, so he got the credit for it. Then case studies. And in case studies, there was one weak point. Because it's not the same to get inspiration from Aldo van Eyck or from Hanop in general, or from Mies van der Rohe, than from nice but just average Korean office. So this is a nice thing, but it's not by far as interesting as it is, for example, the Montreal habitat, right? Because it's very much having that appearance, but in the end the project has not so much elaboration inside. It's more just the outside appearance. So when you have case studies, you can say, okay, this is an image, this is something you might aim for, but you have to go always to the best projects ever of the best architects. You will learn much more, you will have much more information. And that, I think, limited a little bit. Hemin was very much going to the recent developments, but recent is just recent, it's not always better. It doesn't mean we cannot use recent developments or recent projects, right? But just getting to the nearest because they are newer is not always helping. You have to get the best ones. Okay, so this is like a case study, and you see there was not so much to analyze. And if you see, well, this is not a bad project, but it's not so great either. It's quite a common thing. And then he just ended here. So when you're slow taking decisions and they accumulate much material, right, then you have a limitation of time also to develop your project. And Hemin worked mostly on computer. The problem with computer is that you have the temptation to make a finished proposal soon. So actually he made one new project every other week. And then he had a nice project, but it's like a crazy amount of work. Instead of having a logical process of planning better, giving shape little by little, and finally deciding on how you get the final output, right? You don't need to make things by hand, but when you work by computer, you have to also be aware on when your project is good enough to elaborate or not, right? This is why, for example, Gemin, when I started doing 3D models, that was nice, but it was enough to see that works or not. It is not that you have already one project, right? And probably you spend too much time modeling something which is not so worth. So the case with Hemin was that he really could have made like 3 studios in one semester, because he made like in the following 2 months, he made like 4 different projects. Of course, every project much better, but if he had worked on the same idea with more continuity, surely the result would have been better with even less effort, or at least the same. Okay, so this counts as a lecture, so we'll see what people did. I can show you, you have to look for them, but I had one student of 5th year who did a project in Garibondong facility, but it was 2013, and I don't have those in my computer. But it was a really good project. Let me see if I see it. So we were working together in Hongjedong, my group, and the Sonryul group, Professor Sonryul, and they did very nice work. They worked more contextual. They did many works on Eugene Mansion. In purpose, we didn't want to renew Eugene Mansion because we did reuse in Studio 3, but Yunjon did a really beautiful project. Let me see if I find it. I can show you only the result. Let me see if I can go. I have to find it. Okay, I have this line. Then I think setting. Okay, part 2. Okay, let me share another screen. Stop sharing. I will show you just a little bit Yunjong's project. It was Yunjong, I think. It was group project. It was with 2 students, but it was reuse of small houses, and I think it was quite some of the best. Actually, the cover of the book was that project. Okay, Han Yunjong and He Jongdong. One thing they did was working in, well, it's a bit loose. Some of the old villas, right? They just reorganize them to renew them, and then make new spaces. And this is a nice visualization by collage. Probably a little bit too much, but it's a good way to visualize without needing to make a huge work on renderings and so on. There's some view of the streets and the small villas which were renovated. Again, okay, they have the studies of the site in different ways, and some of the movements, graphs, and other studies they did to start working. Let me erase things. Then an idea which, okay, they were very happy with it, but maybe they didn't need it. So one thing that is very shocking or very expressive when you go there is the gas lines. That happened also in Galipon. So this group used the gas lines as a kind of a symbol for individuality, but also for community, right? And this became kind of a motif of design in the project also, which was interesting, but probably like a little bit forced. But okay, this was. This is the plan of the proposal. They worked in the same area mostly as Eugene did. And this was the elevation, so the existing, and they did the drawing of all existing mansions with the evolution over time. So they changed, they provided a structure for green to cover it, and they showed over time how those elements would change, not only with the green, but also with the usage. So this very much this kind of timeline strategy that we commented many times, and I think quite well expressed, right? So without demolishing, just taking out something which are not in good conditions, or making small changes to get a very attractive and new place for living. And of course, a very attractive site plan. There were areas which were not supposed to touch because they were out of the area the city gave us, but they were clever. And then it was just empty, they just filled with trees and they made more green everywhere. So this is the strategies. It's very small, but actually it is about doing many of the things. You have the book yourself, so you could look at it. I think it's worth noting. So cleaning the space between the houses happen, opening staircases, adding programs in the lower floor, right? Sometimes increasing the space for those common programs. And finally, adding space in vertical. So you compensate for those common spaces there. And then including this kind of terraces green. And finally, the artificial topography, which was something not so easy to understand here. And finally, this metaphor of the gas lines were these kind of new connections and this new support for the green places. This is very clear process. Of course, you make those diagrams when you already solved all difficulties, you know how to do it, and you show the result. In the beginning, it's much more diffuse, much more complicated. So if you try to do this from the beginning, you will get always wrong, because already they tried, they tested, right? And they visualize only when they have, maybe not perfect, but the best solution they have for it. So be aware when you see finished things. This is why I like to show you the midterm proposal, but this was not in my class. So I can show you only the final result. So it's the elevations with those kind of additions based on the gas lines, right? The additional floors and this layer with green. And this is the floor plans after the improvements, right? Of course, you may say, come on, how you put so much green in an interior space, right? So there's something that they explained, okay, this is just the interior plans and so on, but sometimes like maybe too much. However, many of the ideas you're speaking, like having the person space, those in between spaces between buildings, and those common programs for the community can be implemented without needing to make a big change, just using what exists already. And it has nothing to do that the original houses are brick or reinforced concrete or stainless steel. Ginu, or Sonu, sorry, not Ginu, Sonu. If the brick building is in good conditions, you can use brick, right? Doesn't mean that you have to remove. Sometimes concrete buildings cannot stand anymore, you have to remove them or reinforce them a lot. Sometimes it is the opposite. The brick buildings are totally useless and you have to just destroy them, right? 1 second, I have a phone call, but 1 second, don't run away. Okay. I had the bank calling the whole morning during a materials class. I know it's calling now, but okay. Again, this is the final result, okay? And you see that these are plans with the standard furniture, standard thing, but they don't have over detailing, and they're not the usual spaces, and the sense of scale is quite good. So be careful with that. You have chairs and desks where you can sit, can meet in spaces in which we can have 6 or 7 people meeting, and so on. Sometimes we have rooms and the sizes of furniture we cannot really use. So here, everything is standard, but still they make sense in terms of size and scale. I would change something, but okay, you can go to details, still things you can improve, but that's another thing. So you have different floors, the sections, and that's the final result, and then the model. Again, we had, this is already another group, but okay. Yeah, there's another way to show the strategies, right? Things you do as a group. This was a large group and they did work in many places giving strategies, but I will not show that. So I just wanted to show you that it is possible to make a renovation of existing buildings without making a huge change in terms of destroying and rebuilding, but it's a huge change in terms of the result of a street and building and so we have like full range, like totally demolishing and making almost new town to almost touching nothing. And all of those are acceptable. And then you see also how things work in groups, right? And I think in that sense, we clarify a lot. Now I'm ready for questions. And after I reply you will be free to go back to your drafting board or your computer and work like crazy. Because for Friday, I wish you try to start having an idea, a bit more defined your typology, your prototype with the dimensions, and how you will, which part of the site you will use and how you will work on them, right? with the specifics you have in each site. So so for Friday, it's that mostly on your side to work. It's time to work back, or it is time to go back to battle. But I want questions. If difficult, better.
Professor, can I ask some question?
Ask it.
Okay. So in the lecture, you usually tell us not to put the bathroom for facing the living room. But in the case you showed us, even most completed project, we can see the bathroom which is facing the living room. So
you mean in last we saw Yunjeon?
Yeah, even in Yunjeon.
Because this only finished we saw, all others were in process, right? The only finished project we saw, it was Yunjeon.
Right.
All other projects were midterm, so they were in process.
Right. So the word completed means the quality of the work. So even that quality of work, we can see kind of that some misorganization. So is it okay to so we don't need to think more about that organization?
You need to think about it. So the case of Yunjeon was quite complex because they did a lot of things, but you never put a bathroom in the living room, and we explained why, right? I said, even when I said the detail of small rooms, I would arrange them differently. So projects are not perfect. And each professor has different points of stress, but never put a bathroom in the living room.
Okay.
Even in the kitchen, right? Because cooking and going to toilet is different. And we already discussed a lot. Even a toilet as a way of a Sobion or Tebion, right? Is different than shower and bathing, right? So having the bath together with the toilet is kind of convenience, modern convenience, but traditionally they're really different spaces. And I told you, I don't know now, but traditionally in France, toilet is one room and bathroom is another room, even in small houses. They never mix because it doesn't fit the vision. I think that's quite correct. But again, you have to think, so you want to make the best house in the world for the following 50 years, right? So you have to think on everything. Everything you do must be the best of the best. How can you make a house without thinking even in the small things, right? One point is, of course, you have sometimes to make trade-offs. You cannot have everything perfect, so you have many difficulties. Probably the toilet in the proper place is the easiest of it. If you go, for example, we saw Seri in the beginning, she was trying a lot of things at the same time. Because she had this shared house with the courtyard, the common space, the individual rooms, the individual bathrooms in between, then the connection with plenty of common space, and then the topography. You have to deal with so many things that it is hard to have everything right. But of course, you have to be ambitious. You want to make things as better as possible, not only one good thing, right? The pity is that most developments have just a nice, attractive exterior, and then everything else is just ordinary at best, not even good. That's a problem. So between having everything perfect and having only one facade with rubbish behind, there's a huge range. There's a huge difference. Right. So you have to be aware of your strong points, weak points. Very seldom one idea will make a perfect project in housing, in public building, in reuse, whatever. But you have to make sure the good points are strong enough to compensate for the weakest points. The weak points are not so terrible as to demerit the whole project. Okay.
Okay, and can
that
I?
Was easy question. Yes.
One
Yes.
more. So you also tell us to not just making a sandwich,
Yes,
but the flat roof and duplicating the floors in the upper floor is also the one of the most using strategy. So
yes.
the sandwich is that strategy of duplicating is wrong?
It's not wrong. So we do very often, but now you have an opportunity, you have total freedom. You have to experiment. So you have to be ambitious and do as much as you can to make unique and better spaces. If you make just a sandwich, you are simplifying. You need to work mainly in floor plan. So you're making things easier, but you are also losing opportunities. And you will see that at least in our group, people were working in section, right, with small differences. And even Jacin was doing floor by floor because he was based on Mies van der Rohe, but he was using like a really high floor height. So he had a very specific three-dimensional strategy, right? Other students remember Dassault, for example, or I don't know, even SETI or others were really working in section as much as they could, right? To make not just that lazy floor by floor plan, and then the interior architect will do something special. I just put the partition walls. So there's nothing wrong about it. Is that if you can do better, you try to do better. If you want to do something different, more special, more possibilities, you open your possibilities, don't limit them. And again, this is a school, this is an exercise. So you try to do as much as you can so you have a wider training. And then once you do complex sections, that's part of your repertoire, right? You will be not scared to do them, or you will not try to do always the easy way because you never did something which is different or more difficult. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
So that's similar as the bathroom in the living room, I mean. So you have to try to do always better and try as many things as you can, right? Of course, within the limit we have on time and those things. So each student try to do something special. Some work in the three-dimensional, some people worked more in the giving the terrace space, the exteriors, the courtyards, and so on. Okay. Good. More questions? Everybody thinking just in going for dinner? You have to work for 2 hours. That's the plan. So even if we leave the class, you keep working. That's your duty. Nothing else to ask? Not questions. Something you want, something you miss, something you want me to explain next week or next day, Friday? Some petition? Some demand?
Professor,
Yes.
no, this relates a little bit from Jung-hyung's question.
Yes.
For the assembly of the building,
Yes.
I'm probably sure there are very interesting types of references that you could give us, because as you know, we have a less database compared to you. So could you give us very interesting examples of those references which have typologies mixed into a very interesting building?
Well, I think this is what I did in the housing experiment lectures. Actually, they were all interesting and not very usual. I could, if you want, I can copulate a bit more and try to show you on Friday. But the effort or the interest of those lectures is not repeating the buildings everybody knows or showing them a different vision, right? So if you always follow the same examples, you're limited to that. So I think we have already quite a few examples there, but I will try to collect more. So because they are endless, and so let me find a few ones so I can make maybe 10 or 12 more examples for Friday.
Thank you.
But yeah, that's a good question. So thank you for asking. But still go back to the lectures and see the examples we have there, and go back to also to the readings. Well, maybe you memorize already, but yes, many of the examples I showed before are not easy to find. This is why I share with you, because I think they are really interesting and they have many things you can just take from them, right? And different styles which can fit different personalities. If you see from last year, see how different is that minimalistic Dassault to that super explosive Seri, which right? But they both did very nice work, right? Okay, so I have a Sukche additional for Friday. Thank you. Anything else? Anything to
sorry,
complain?
sorry,
Yes.
I have a question.
Yes, sure.
Do I have to put a new building on the site? Totally new building.
Okay, so I think in terms of training of exercise, the course, actually my study is planned basically to make a new construction, new housing building. So you have total freedom, but still with the constraint of the context you are, so trying to be contextual. You have a possibility to work in the renovation, right? So you have the old apartments, and renovation can be also okay, but the renovation, the addition you have to make, it should be substantially altering the building. So you really have to deal with the important part of new construction. Probably like leaving no more than 50% original and renewing more than 50%. In the case of Hongjedong, we said before, that group, they actually kept most of the appearance, but it was like a 50% because they changed the program and they added the skin, so probably it was 50% addition. I think that was a beautiful project and I cannot complain. That was one of the best last year in the whole fourth year. Sorry, in the third year, Studio 4. But I think at some point it's interesting you work in the new construction, new building. But if you have again renovation with the substantial additions, and well, it should be okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for asking.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, so today then let's finish here. Please do not get distracted. Do not make charcoal drawings with a beautiful street with trees and so on. Don't make 3 hours hatches of the sunshades and things like that. Just really go to those houses you really love, you like, small, large, whatever adequate to the site, and see how you can combine those ideas with the workshop you did. And now you have more freedom. So you're not a group anymore, so you can just be more yourself, but still you have a starting point for working. So let's see what we have on Friday. And I think we have 2 weeks to midterm, and maybe probably 2 more weeks for this stage. So think on a 4-week time. Don't get so much pressed with the midterm, okay? Get pressed, but it's not final. So think on the 4 weeks process, right? Which is quite enough to have this more or less arranged, okay? Good. That's it. As you know, Gokuro-sama deshita. See you Friday. Okay. Goodbye.